All right, let's just see if we manage to go live. Not sure if we are live yet, but we're going to find out soon enough. And yes, we are live. Amazing. So hello and welcome everyone to another Facebook Live with Prof. Noakes. My name is Jana Retief and I will be your host today. We're really excited to have you all with us. So if this is the first time that you're joining one of these lives, you can ask Prof all your health, nutrition, and performance related questions. Just pop them in the comment box and we will do our best to get to them today. If you ask questions before and we did not manage to get to them, don't worry. We have them on a list and we're going to start off with those questions today. However, before we jump in, there's just a few announcements that I would like to make. And the first one is about the Noakes Foundation's Patreon page. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Patreon and what it is, but it's a platform that helps us raise funds to do this incredible work of Professor Tim Noakes and the foundation. You have different options in terms of how you can support us through this platform, starting by just $5. And that $5 can truly make a difference. In South African rands, I don't want to lie, but I think give or take, it's about 90 to 100 rand, depending on the interest rates. So I would really like to ask you to consider to sign up as one of our Patreons. We'll also be creating very Patreon-specific content that's only for our special Patreons who has joined our Patreon community. So that is the first thing. Our media team will post the link and all the other information with regards to the Patreon page in the comments section. And then another very exciting announcement is that the Nutrition Network currently has a 50% discount sale on the advisor training. And this is a birthday sale. It's only valid for the month of July. And this certified online training is specifically designed for low-carb enthusiasts wishing to upskill and acquire professional training in keto and LCHF nutrition. So have a look at that and don't miss out on that amazing discount. So, Prof, you mentioned that you have something to share with our audience today. So over to you.
Yeah, I prepared a talk for the Nutrition Network graduation last night, and I was influenced by a number of factors that have happened recently. And I realized that when you classify conversations, conversations can fall into one of four categories. The first category is the person you're talking to can tell you what their beliefs are. For example, and people do normally talk about religious beliefs, but let's take it to a science basis. So someone might say, I believe humans cause climate change. Now that's completely untestable hypothesis because there's no second Earth that we can depopulate and then see what happens in the next million years to the climate. So if you say, I believe something like that, the question is it a testable hypothesis or not? If it's not a testable hypothesis, it has no scientific meaning whatsoever. And a lot of us are trained in professions where the professor will say, I believe. But so why do you believe that? We don't want to hear, I believe. We want something more than that. The second one is an opinion. So I have the opinion that climate change, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. That's neither a scientific or not. It's not, it doesn't matter. Again, it has no scientific validity at all. And the third one is propaganda. And that is what has really taken over the world. And right last night at our Nutrition Network graduation, one of the students said he spent 20 years writing propaganda. He said, we know how to do it. We can change your mind. We can manipulate you very easily. There's books written about it. And he suggested we should read one book. But most of what we read in the mainstream media is propaganda. And the greatest propaganda, as far as the Nutrition Network goes, is the dietary propaganda, which starts in 1977 and completely reverses everything that we had been eating, humans had been eating for 3 million years. And it was pure propaganda. There was no science behind it whatsoever. People just dreamt it up, and it was like, it's my belief, my personal belief that this is what we should do. And we fell for it. And the tragedy is a lot of the graduates last night spoke it, and they said, I'm using a low carb diet. I'm using it with great success, but people look at me as if I'm mad. And the reason is because they've sucked in the propaganda and their brains have been manipulated by the propaganda. So that's what we're really up against. And then the fourth conversation is testable hypothesis. And that's what we talk about. We base our evidence on what's testable and has been tested to try to disprove it. And so that's the science. The science is all about testable hypotheses. If there's not a testable hypothesis, it doesn't exist in science. And you may believe it or whatever, but it's not a scientific belief that you have. And I think that's very important. And that our big battle is with propaganda, which has taken over the medical profession completely, because the goal is to sell products, not to make people healthy. So that's my few seconds worth. Those are the 4 points: beliefs, opinions, propaganda, and testable hypothesis. And 99% of the discussion is on propaganda and 1% is testable hypothesis.
Thank you for that, Prof. I think that is quite a bit of wisdom. It makes me think about our 5-year-old daughter. She's now on a phase like she just wants to know everything, and she's got all these questions, and she now figured out that it's possible to click on the microphone and then ask Google. So whenever she asks me a question and I'm like, I have no idea, she'll be like, let's ask Google. And I had to explain to her that, just because Google says something, it's not necessarily true. And we had this whole discussion around fake news and, how do we know something is true and how do we know something is not true? And I mean, I can't remember, being taught these type of questioning skills as a child. Even when you went to university, in school, you just accept when a specific authority tells you something or teaches you something, that you just accept it as the truth. So it's very important that, we do question. We question the science, we question everything, and just take things as it is. And like you say, just don't fall for the propaganda. So thank you so much for that, Prof. I want to quickly head over to the comment section because I see we already got quite a few people saying hi. So those of you that just joined us, let us know where you're from. Prof and I are both tuning in from a very sunny, actually a lovely winter sunny day here in Cape Town. I say Glauce is joining us again all the way from Brazil. I love seeing your name here. She's here every month. Then Eileen says Guten Tag from Germany. Wendy Moore is here from Canada. And I see we already have questions coming in, and Galileo is here all the way from the Philippines. So I think we're just going to dive into our first question. And I see here, Julia, I think this is a question you asked in one of the previous lives, and I see you ask it again. So we'll just start off with that. So Prof. Julia wants to know, please, more information on LMHR, which I am assuming is lean mass hyperresponder, which got to do with, I think, cholesterol, if I'm correct. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I certainly can tell you what the outcome is, and I'm not sure I understand the biology yet. So what happens with the lean mass hyperresponders are that they go on the low carbohydrate diet and they get very lean, and their cholesterol goes up to huge numbers. In our terms, it might be 9 or 10. That probably might be 300 or 400 in the American units. And of course, then everyone says, well, this is going to cause heart disease and so on. David Feldman is the man who's really researched it, and Nick Norwitz, former South African. Those two have written an abstract, which I have the abstract, but it's not all the detail, in which they looked at people who were lean and who had this hyper response. And they're working out the mechanisms causing it. And I haven't read enough to know exactly what the mechanisms are. So I can only tell you what the phenomenon is. The phenomenon is as I've described it. Now, we would not think that means anything, that you're at risk of heart disease because your cholesterol has gone up to that extent. The key again in heart disease is diabetes. What Nick Norwitz did, and he's this young giant, and he does some fabulous work. And he's at Harvard as a medical student. He has a PhD in psychology, and then he goes to do medicine. And while he's doing his medicine, he's publishing papers and doing these wonderful videos all the time. So he will have done a video on it. And what he did was, he turns out he's one of these lean mass hyper responders. So he decided he would do a clinical trial, a randomized controlled clinical trial with an N equals 1. So remember, this is testable hypothesis. And the hypothesis is that you become hyper responsive and get high cholesterol because you've got so little carbohydrate, and that the metabolism is changed in that way. The lack of carbohydrate causes the very high cholesterol. So he decided that he would take Oreos, which are high in carbohydrate. I think he took 12 of these biscuits, very sweet biscuits. He would take 12 a day. And so he started the trial, took his 12 Oreos a day, and his cholesterol came streaming down. It actually rocketed down, you see, tending to prove the hypothesis is this lack of carbohydrate that's causing these very high cholesterol levels. So then he stopped. After 6 weeks, he measured what the results were. Then he stopped and washed out. So then his cholesterol, of course, shot up again, because that was what it was meant to do. And then he took a statin, which would lower his cholesterol. It turned out the statin was much less effective than the Oreos. So he proved, if you want to lower your cholesterol, just take Oreos. But of course, that's not what he was trying to show. So he was trying to show that carbohydrate, if you reduce carbohydrates in your diet, some people will show this hyper response in cholesterol, and it's utterly meaningless. They've also, as far as I know, done a study for about 3 years on these lean mass hyper responders, and they found that their arteries did not clog up all of a sudden. Their arteries were exactly the same after 3 years. There was no progression of arterial disease as a result of having these very high cholesterols. So that was nice evidence that these very high cholesterols are not important. So to answer your question, if you are an LMHR, there's clearly nothing to worry about. It's just an individual's response to a very low carbohydrate diet, their cholesterol goes up. And I'm sure the pathways will have been described by David Feldman. I'm not sure of them, but that's not going to cause you to get arterial disease. And we've got the first clinical evidence, at least a 3-year trial, randomized controlled trial, this was a prospective trial, where they looked specifically, were these high cholesterols causing a progression of disease, and they weren't. So at the moment, there's no reason to worry about that. It's just more evidence that cholesterol is not the cause of arterial disease.
Thank you for that answer, Prof. And thank you, Julia, for that very, very interesting question. The next question is from Nandi. What are the best foods to start a baby with solids, please?
Excuse me. Thanks, Nandi, for asking that question. So, of course, you know that I went to court for all these things, for saying you should wean your child, wean your child onto real foods, meaning animal produce. We did write a book called Superfoods for Super Kids, and that has very detailed information on how you should raise your child. Basically, it's the foods that you are eating. If you are eating a low carbohydrate diet, those are the foods that you should be using. And it's animal produce. But now, if you think back 3 million years ago, there were no ultra-processed foods. So how did people raise babies? They raised them on eating what they were eating. And what they discovered, that bone marrow and liver and those highly nutritionally dense foods were exactly what they need. So animal produce, particularly the most nutrient dense ones, are what one should be eating. But again, it would be meat, fish, eggs, dairy. Those would be the foods that you need to raise your child on. You just need to work out how to prepare it. And children will choose those foods ultimately. When they're given those foods versus other foods, they'll prefer those nutrient-dense foods. There was a study by a lady called Clara Davis, and we discussed this in the book. And she raised children, and she gave them all sorts of options. She gave them all different options for foods. And she worked out what they would choose. And they would tend to choose those foods that we spoke about. The nutrient-dense animal-based foods were the ones that they chose, not the grains that we've replaced our diet, the weaning diet with. I mean, it's easier to say what you shouldn't eat. You shouldn't eat purity baby food and those foods which are made of grains. Children don't need that. They don't need the sugar. That sets up the sugar addiction very early on, which is part of the goal of it, of these lots of sugar in these baby foods. You don't want those pureed foods. If you're going to puree the foods, start with real animal produce.
Thank you for that, Prof. The next question is from Tammy, and it's a little bit long. She lists a few points, so I'm going to read it through. So she starts off by saying, hello from New Zealand. My questions are all interrelated. Listening to a podcast from Dr. Richard Johnson, he says the following, in brief about fructose making in the body as opposed to consuming them. Our bodies can make their own fructose. High GA carbs makes fructose. High glucose in the blood stimulates fructose making. Diabetics make fructose. Salt activates enzymes that can convert glucose into fructose. Therefore, salt is a problem and causes gain. Fructose works through the production of uric acid, which we cannot break down, leading to problems. We don't metabolize vitamin C and therefore ought to be taking it, ? And then she says, this is a very brief description of what he said. What is your understanding or belief about his research? And is salt a concern, and how much is too much?
Sorry, I didn't quite get, is what a concern?
Salt.
Salt.
Is salt a concern, and how much salt is too much?
Okay, so you got two questions. First, it was fructose, and you described what Richard Johnson said. And then you questioned about salt. And then you also asked about vitamin C. So humans don't produce our own vitamin C, so we have to take it in. So that's an important point. I believe Richard Johnson, I've read his books and they make sense to me. Again, it's fairly technical, quite high quality biochemistry. And I'm not really qualified to judge that, but his arguments that he makes seem very valid. And the evidence that fructose is quite harmful for the body, I think, is accepted. That fructose is more likely to cause fatty liver, and then the fatty liver cause all these insulin resistance issues. So I would say that on that point about fructose, he is correct. The issue of uric acid is quite correct. That also is clearly not a good substance to have circulating the body. High uric acid is also associated with risk of heart disease, and I think it comes back to insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome. Should you take vitamin C? I think vitamin C is undervalued, and one of my great friends is Paul Murrick, who prior to COVID was one of the world's authorities on the acute management of people who are critically ill. And he used intravenous treatments, including vitamin C, plus a whole lot of other things. And with clinical trials was able to show that the vitamin C intravenously was very helpful. I know that there are some cancer protocols where they give vitamin C in high doses intravenously and are reporting at least some success. So I think vitamin C is undervalued, and I certainly take some once or twice a week on the basis of that evidence. I just think that there is enough evidence to suggest that we do need vitamin C. With regard to salt, salt is really interesting because it turns out that the recommended doses are about 2 grams a day are too little, and mortality is higher in people ingesting only 2 grams a day. And the mortality drops and it plateaus at the bottom at about 5 grams of sodium a day, and then it rises again. So people who are salt sensitive, once they start taking more than 5 grams a day, are probably increasing their risks of arterial disease and heart disease. Whereas the same happens if you reduce your salt intake to 2 grams per day. So I don't follow that there's any good evidence that you need to restrict your salt intake, because most people will naturally take about 5 grams a day maximum. They won't tend to go over that. So I hope I've given you my answer. My answer is Richard Johnson has worked very thoroughly He's a quality scientist. He's evidence-based. Everything he says is evidence-based. He speaks testable hypotheses. He's not funded, sorry, he was funded by industry. He was funded by PepsiCo, I think. Well, it was one of the drink industry products. He was funded by them, and then he went against them. And he said, what you're putting in these drinks, high fructose, is harmful. And he dissociated from them. So he's not funded by industry. In fact, he stepped back from industry, which makes him even more credible. And I think that his work on uric acid as a component of this whole problem with too much fructose producing uric acid is very valid. So congratulations for reading his work. And I think that you can accept it as trustworthy as anyone else's opinion.
Thank you, Prof, for that. And thank you so much for that very interesting question, Tammy. The next question we have is from Quibus. So he's saying, I have been doing some multi-day adventure racing and 250-kilometer events, always just to test and experiment with the human mind. I come from the world of neuroscience, and I'm definitely more scientist than athlete. I have been on a LCHF diet since February this year and lost 12.5 kilograms, and my mood emotions are stable for the first time in my life. Hence, I can never go back to the old way of eating. I do have a challenge, however, and really hope you can send me in the correct direction. In September, I will do a 6-stage or 6-day, 250-kilometer desert run, unassisted. This will be my 5th time doing a 250-kilometer, but the previous 4 times was done on a high-carb diet, dried freeze foods, 2-minute noodles, anything light to carry. This time around, I want to use a low-carb, high-fat diet, but do not even know where to start thinking about the fact that the food needs to be as light as possible, which fat is not, and needs to last at least 7 days in 40 plus Celsius temperatures. Any assistance or just guidance pointing me in the correct direction will be amazing.
Yo, that's quite a question. And the biggest issue is the fact that you're in the heat. And how do you keep these foods safe when you're running and they don't go putrid? Because we're going to tell you to eat meat and fat. And the best food is pemmican. That's unquestionably the best endurance food for what you're trying to do. So the story of pemmican is that it was produced by the Plains Indians, that they kill the buffalo, and they didn't have fridges. So how did they keep some of the meat which would last for a long time? Obviously, they used salt in some of the meat, but in some they mixed about one portion of fat to 3 portions. Sorry, 1 portion of fat to 3 portions of meat, something like that. So they produced this very high concentration of energy, and it didn't go off. The way they prepared it prevented it going off, and people came back years later and discovered that pemmican had lasted 20, 30 years without going off. Why pemmican was so successful was when the trappers arrived in Canada and they had to go north, and they had to go into the freezing north, and they would trap animals and then they would sell their skins. They fed on pemmican. That's all they ate. They didn't eat anything else. I guess they probably killed animals as well, but pemmican was what allowed the industry to grow. And the Hudson River Company is based on pemmican. That's how it became famous. And pemmican was so important in those days that there were wars. There were 2 pemmican wars. I can't remember the details, but they were driven by people trying to get control of the pemmican production industry. So what I've told you is that there is a meat and fat combination which is ideal, and it's pemmican. And I think what you need to do is, you've got some time till September, see if you can source some real pemmican, and I would use that, because it's going to give you all the nutrients you need, all the energy you need, and it's low carbohydrate. Now, so that's the basis, and it'll last. it won't go off. And I'm not sure what else you could do from animal produce that wouldn't go off. Now, and so that's what I think you should do. But now, what about carbohydrates? So we now know that you will need some you probably will need some carbohydrate. After about 4 or 5 hours, you may well need some carbohydrate, but you only need a touch. And it's literally 10 grams an hour. That's all you need. And that you can take with you easily. Because most of the sachets are in fact 25 grams. So a couple of those sachets a day, 2 or 3 sachets will see you through. So that's my advice. And it's obviously you need to practice and try it and see if you can get a pemmican that works for you. But that's the direction to go. You want a meat and fat combination that is available and doesn't go off, doesn't putrefy. And the only product that doesn't, that I know of, without requiring either too much salt or refrigeration, is pemmican. So I hope I put you in the right direction. And when you win the race on your pemmican, you can tell us how well it went.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Kubus, for that question. I have to say we have made pemmican before, and you can even dry out blueberries and also put that in the mix as well. But yeah, it is doable to make at home, but I definitely agree you should kind of do like a bit of a trial and test to see what type of combination works. And I think there are some recipes available online as well to try and see. So good luck with that, Kubus, and let us know how that goes. We'd love to hear. I'm quickly going to go over to the comment section again, Prof, because we had a few more people joining us. So Maria saying hi all the way from Sweden. Saleha, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, is all the way from Casa del Sol in Spain. Lorraine is from Lyme Regis. And let me see who else joined us. Jabu is here. Yen is here. Oh, thank you guys so much for joining us today. It's always lovely to hear where you all are from. So, Prof, the next question is from Glaute. And they're asking, Prof, I've been on the diet for 2 years now. And recently I've had a blood test and my urea has increased from January 2023. It was 33 milligrams per deciliter. And now June 2024, it's 41 milligrams per deciliter. Should I be worried? Recently, I've started taking whey protein again. Is it a factor? Am I overloading my body? Any ideas will be welcome. I'm a 52 active and currently on hormone replacement therapy. Thanks, Prof.
Well, firstly, congratulations on monitoring yourself so carefully. I think that's really important. I wonder if you'd measured your glucose parameters, because we always like to think about them. So the rising urea will have worried your doctor, and he might have said, well, your kidneys are failing. And that's simply not true. It's if you have a high protein intake in your diet, your urea will be elevated, and it doesn't mean that your kidneys are not working. If you have any concerns, all you have to do is ask your doctor to do a 24-hour urine sample on you. So you collect urine for 24 hours. At the end of 24 hours, he draws your blood and he measures urea and creatinine in the bloodstream. And that will tell him how well you're getting rid of creatinine, because he knows what's in the blood and he knows what's in your urine. So he can work out how much you're clearing every 24 hours. And what happens as your kidneys fail, you clear less and less creatinine. So therefore, that indicates your kidneys are failing. And I can promise you that he's not going to find that. He's not going to find you any evidence for kidney failure. If you had kidney failure, your values would be in the hundreds, not 41. They'd be in the 500s. That's where you get, or 100 to 500. That's more like kidney failure. Those values, your values only went up 8 units, it's meaningless. It's probably within the error of the measurement. Now, in other words, if you put your first sample through and it came out 33, and the same day you put another sample through of the same batch, it might have come back 41. So that's no change whatsoever. So thank you very much for asking. But if you really are concerned, then you must do a 24-hour urine. specimen collection to see if your kidneys are functioning, and that will, I'm sure it'll show you your kidneys are functioning beautifully. But that's the only way to test whether this urea elevation from 33 to 41 is meaningful, and it's not. It's just too low to be of any consequence.
Thank you for that, Prof. And thank you, Glauce, for that question. The next question is from Wendy, and it also relates to fructose. So she's asking, is fructose in low-carb foods, such as berries, acceptable in your opinion or not? Because the sugar is less absorbable due to the fiber content.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And also the fact that you're eating a low-carb diet means you're restricting the number of berries that you actually eat. So I eat berries once or twice a week, and they don't affect my blood glucose control in any way. So I think that's fine. I can't see it's, but if you were to take a lot of fructose and from a lot of berries, that would be a problem. But you're doing everything else right. So you're allowed to have a little bit of fructose now and again. The danger with adding sweet tasting foods is that you get back your addiction. And so for those of us who are sugar addicts, and the more we talk about it and the more you hear the experts, they're beginning to realize that sugar addiction is so critical to health and weight control. And essentially the reason why people are so unhealthy is, but most of them have got the sugar addiction. And so they can't convert to a decent low carb diet because they can't get rid of the sugar. So in your case, that's not going to happen. But if you were to notice that you were starting to get back the craving for sweetness, then you need to cut back on the berries. But a small portion of berries every day or every few days is not going to make any difference as long as your diet remains low carb in the majority, that you've got lots of fat and lots of protein.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for that question. The next question is from Jabu. Hi, Prof. What is the role of foods like meat, turkey, beetroot, bananas, avocados, etc., in creating a good balance between Na and K, and thereby manage blood pressure at appropriate levels?
Yeah, thanks, Java. Lovely to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. And when you're next in Cape Town, you must please call me and let's say we can have a good chat and meet your wife again. That would be wonderful. So, Jabu, I think the most important electrolyte probably is magnesium and zinc. It seems to me that they are the most important. And you're quite right that the concern has always been sodium. And my former professor ran the hypertension clinic at a local hospital, and I know that he asked every patient how much sodium was in their diet, but never once did he ask how much refined carbohydrate is in the diet and what's your level of insulin resistance. So hypertension is clearly linked to insulin resistance, and it's very helped by a low carbohydrate diet, regardless of whether you restrict sodium and you increase potassium. There's a paper out this last week showing that the 40% of people who had the highest magnesium in the blood lived the longest. And magnesium has a very special role in the whole body. And I suspect that if we were to look for one electrolyte that was really important and which is probably undervalued, is magnesium. So I certainly add magnesium and zinc to my diet, and I think I noticed the differences. So those are what I would suggest. And I think all the foods you suggested to eat, they're fantastic. They're really good. And your body will generally be able to manage and work out what it must excrete and what it must retain. Certainly with sodium, the body regulates its sodium content to the smallest grain. It's highly regulated. Potassium has to be the same, because if your potassium rises, it's catastrophic for your heart, and if it drops, it's the same. So the control mechanism must be very, very extensive, and they must be working overtime to make sure that even if the diet's a little low in potassium, you're still getting enough potassium. So that my point would be that the foods you suggested, I think they're excellent. You should keep eating them. And think about magnesium. would be the one to think about. But this is a general statement. It seems to me that you need to eat more magnesium than the general public are currently eating. And I suspect it's because ultra-processed foods are probably low in magnesium. You need the animal produce to get the right amounts of magnesium.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you so much for that question. The next question is from Florence. I have been on the diet since 2019 to date. I do not cheat. If at all, it will be with nuts or fresh corn. I lost weight from 115 kilograms to 72 by February 2024. However, I have started gaining weight, yet I still maintain the lifestyle. What could be causing this?
Okay, so it's probable that you are eating more calories. And, I know we don't say calories are not critical because not all calories are the same. The nuts will be the problem, I suspect, because they're a bit more high in carbohydrate than you think. And they're also highly addictive. They're lovely to crunch and eat. So I suspect you might be overeating on the nuts. You might be overeating on fats as well. That's what's become apparent. Dr. Ian Felt, who really got me involved in this field and was the first person I really listened to. It's really interesting because he's drawn a lot of criticism lately, and I'm not sure whether it's valid or not. I'm open-minded to see what the story is. But having promoted the low carbohydrate diet for 10, 15 years and being has one of the best websites, Diet Doctor, about 2 years ago, he changed and said it's not the low carbohydrate that's important, it's a high protein. And so they've started classifying foods on the basis of how much protein they have compared to calories. So what they want you to eat are foods which are high in protein and low in calories, which generally means lower in fat, because protein usually comes with fat. So that although you're getting more protein, you're also getting more calories because of the fat. And so he's tried to dissociate that and said that by increasing the protein, you can satiate yourself without taking in all that fat that we were promoting in the low-carb diet. So according to that model, it may well be that you're eating more fat and less protein than you need to. And I've certainly seen some people get great results by increasing their protein intake. The problem is protein is difficult to get by itself without fat. That's the issue. That most meat that you eat is higher in fat. It's difficult to get leaner meats, and the same fish is excellent and chicken is excellent because they are high in protein and low in fat. Dairy is a disaster because by and large it's high in fat and lower in protein. And fatty meat, of course, is not good for you. Or it's not if you want to get a high protein intake. So my advice would be to reduce the nuts and check how much dairy you're taking in and increase the consumption of low-fat meats. Get your protein, but get less of the fat. And I would predict that your weight will drop a kilogram or two, and it'll stop rising again. So I think Dr. Ian Felt has made a huge contribution in promoting the low-carb diet. And I think he's right in promoting higher protein intake. Whether he's right in saying you can also increase your carbohydrates when you increase the protein, I'm not sure of that yet. It may well be true, but it's an N equal 1 at the moment. It's Dr. Ian Felt's own experience. He found that when he increased the protein, he could increase his carbohydrate and still lost weight. So, but I honestly do believe that there are different types. I know there's one person I've dealt with, and she has to have a high protein intake to control her weight. Cutting carbs by itself is not good enough because she would then eat too much fat and she couldn't lose the weight. But when she pushed up the protein, the results were absolutely spectacular. And so I do think that whereas the majority of us benefit by cutting the carbs and increasing the fat, there's a proportion of people for whom that doesn't work ideally. And in fact, we know that because when our book Law of Running was written and published in 2012, people who went on the diet, about 10% of them put on weight. And that was a question of what was happening. They were promised they would cut the carbs. But I think that they were the people who started overeating on fat. And then the only way to correct that is to eat more protein. So that you might like to go to Dr. Ian Feld's website and see what he suggests. And the beauty of this is that you will know within a month whether I'm talking rubbish or Dr. Ian Feld is correct. You'll find that out because your weight will change appropriately. So that's the beauty of this. You don't have to wait 100 years before you'll know what works. So I think I would advise you to go to Dr. Ian Feld's website, check what he's saying, look at the foods which are higher in protein and are satiating, and add some of those to your diet, and maybe take out some of the foods which he claims are not satiating and have too much fat or energy in them, and see what happens. And then next month you can tell us what happened.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Florence. And yes, please come and let us know how it goes. I quickly want to head back to the comment section, Prof, because we have so many people on our live today. It's just incredible, and I love hearing from all of you. So Yen was saying they're from the Philippines. Florence is saying hi. Sonia is from County Durham. We have Lucky that is also joining us. Maria from the Philippines. And then we have here Gail is here with us. And I just saw here Samir is also saying hi. And then Elsa saying middag almal. Hello Elsa, baie welkom hier by ons. And Ali is from West Yorkshire in the UK. So welcome everyone. I know we're almost at the end of the live, but we still have some time for a few questions. So let's get on with them. Prof, the next question is from Megan. And she's saying, hi, Prof. I follow a predominantly animal-based diet, but over weekends I indulge a little in other foods and have some alcohol. Almost every day I wake up and within an hour or two I get such stomach aches, like a burning sensation. Is it heartburn or what could be the cause of it? The only thing that helps is if I eat, and that is usually eggs, or if I drink loads of water. What does this mean and what can I do to make it stop?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to make a diagnosis at this distance. And so I think that probably if it is happening repeatedly, you probably should consult your doctor. And I'm sure that he will look to see if you might have a stomach ulcer that obviously it's not a common disease anymore, but it is caused by bacteria, which could have come, who knows where they came from. And he can treat you with antibiotics if it turns out to be an ulcer. So I would think that I would say you must first go the conventional medical route. And if they don't find anything, there's nothing wrong, the stomach's perfect, the esophagus is fine, then you maybe would start considering something in your nutrition that might be causing it. If it is reflux, you would want to ask him, is there evidence that you've got esophageal gastric reflux into the esophagus causing the discomfort? And I believe that that is caused by carbohydrates in the diet. So it may well be that the weekend binging is upsetting the bacteria in the gut. Please understand this is hypothetical. The theory is that the reflux happens because methane is released in the upper gut and then it travels upwards. And so it goes from the stomach to the esophagus. And as the methane comes up, it takes some gastric acid. And the lining of the esophagus is not really designed to be coping with a low pH, highly acidic solution. So that irritates the lining and then it gets inflamed and that causes the pain every time you get this reflux. So I know that gastric reflux is very, very well treated with our low carbohydrate diets. And most people will recover from it. And so those are the 2 points. I think firstly, you need to make sure that you don't have something else causing the problem that is a real medical problem which needs to be addressed by your doctor, or whether you simply have reflux. And if you do have reflux, then I think you need to look at the carbohydrate intake on the weekends. And that would be simple, stop taking the carbs on the weekends for a month and then see what happens. If it disappears, then you know what the cause is. If it doesn't, then I don't know what it could be. And you'll just have to keep thinking and pushing and finding out other options for your treatment.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that answer. And thank you, Megan, for that very interesting question. The next question is from Sonia. I'm 64 and 4 weeks ago started a high fat, low carb, and I have lost 12 pounds so far. So happy. Not only that, I had very high blood pressure, 190 over 100, and it is now down to 135 over 75. I have found your book, The Real Meal, this replacement, but I think might be revolution, fascinating. Thank you so much. What I would like to know is, am I okay to having full fat milk in my tea? A lot of people have said I shouldn't have any milk as it has lots of sugar in it.
Yeah, I think you're doing so well that the fact that you eat drinking full milk, cream milk doesn't matter. You know, if you wanted to make sure you didn't get any carbs in your tea, you could have cream, just have cream, proper cream, because cream has a low carbohydrate content. But you know, you're doing so well, I wouldn't think that it's going to make a difference. What is clear to me is that you are incredibly carbohydrate sensitive, and you've had this incredible result by cutting the carbs. So, but you've got the carbs down low enough that you've got all the benefits. And that's what we always say, you know, you've got to get the carb intake below the certain amount, which for you is the threshold. And for some, that threshold is 100 grams a day. For some, it's 50. For me, it's 25 or less. But we each have a threshold, and you just go 1 gram above it or a few grams above it, and you lose all the benefits. And people find that very, very difficult. So what I can tell you is that you've had a great result because you've got below the threshold, your carbohydrate threshold, and worrying about the milk and the tea, unless you're having 20 cups of tea a day, I don't think that's going to make any difference. You're doing so well. I would advise you just to keep going. And please, everyone who's listening, look at your blood pressure response. You said from 198 over 100, which some people would put you in hospital. If you compared to the doctor, he might send you to hospital. But he would certainly load you up with medication if you came in with that value. And unfortunately, you'd have to take those medications for life, and they don't make any difference. You know, the mortality if I treat you with 198 over 100 on medication, it doesn't make any difference, because although we lower your blood pressure, the medications themselves have problems. So the benefit is trivial. You do get a benefit from lowering your blood pressure, but there are harmful effects of taking the medication. But getting your blood pressure to 135/75, that's blood pressure you see in 20-year-olds. And that's fantastic. And that just shows, again, insulin resistance is the driver of hypertension, and it's curable by cutting carbs. And what you've shown is that you're incredibly sensitive to carbohydrate, and you got it right. And that thing, you know, diabetes and hypertension are carbohydrate intolerance diseases. And all you have to do is get rid of the carbs, and guess what? You get cured.
Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you, Sonia, for that question. The next question is from Galeo. I tried measuring my blood glucose through a CGM. My blood sugar stuck at around 70 to 73 milligrams per deciliter. At what level of blood glucose would you suggest that I introduce the 10 grams of carb? Or at what time, after how many hours of running, shall we introduce that 10 grams per hour? The blood glucose was measured while running 20 kilometers. And then saying, regarding magnesium, would you suggest supplementation or through magnesium sprays? Still running related.
Yeah, so my general feeling is that magnesium is something that you can, if you want to take it, take it. It's going to be, I think it'll be beneficial. So we can get rid of that one. So now what you said is you ran 20 kilometers and your blood glucose was 70 to 73, which is fantastic, because that's smack bang in the normal range. And you didn't get any symptoms. If it goes down to about 50 or so, or 40, you might start to get symptoms of lightheadedness, difficulty in concentrating. That's when the 10 grams of carbohydrate will make a difference. But if you're at 70 to 73, you're fine. Your brain's working properly and you don't have to worry. Because the reason that you can cope with a low blood glucose like that is because you're burning ketones as well. And the brain just is very happy to burn the ketones. And it can allow your blood glucose to drop much lower before you develop symptoms. So I think what you're doing is you're measuring your glucose and you're finding that it's fine. The values were perfect. What you need next to do is to see if you can get symptoms. See if you can actually run far enough so that you start to feel lightheaded and you just don't want to continue running. Then what you need is to monitor what your glucose level is, and I'll predict it'll be about 50. And that just tells you the level to which you can drop before you develop symptoms. And then you just take your 10 grams of glucose, and magically within 10 minutes, all your symptoms will completely disappear. And you'll feel champion again, and you'll want to go on again. You'll be fine to run. That's the test. And then you know that you can drop to 50, and that's only time you need to start taking carbs during exercise. As long as your glucose is above 50, there's no point in you taking extra glucose.
Thank you, Prof. And I think then he also wanted to know what's the best way to take magnesium, via tablet, or are those sprays that you get also sufficient?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the sprays, but the tablets are fine. That's what have been conventionally used. I'm not sure why
Okay.
the spray would be beneficial. It's a liquid, I guess, but
Yeah.
I wonder
I
what
think you get sprays for your mouth, and that you even get sprays that you can spray, I think, on your skin. Yeah.
well, I wouldn't be sure of those, but the one in the mouth might work. But you need a decent amount of magnesium, and I'm not quite sure what the dose is, but I'm not sure that you would always get it from a spray.
All right. Thank you, Prof. We have one last question for today, and it's from Gail. And she's saying, hi, Prof. I eat a low carb diet and blood glucose is good. However, my cortisol levels are over 600. I can't lose weight, particularly around my waist. I also have had endometrial cancer. Any advice for me, please?
Okay, Gail. Well, the endometrial cancer, the risk factor is probably insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. So that's great that you're addressing that and preventing future problems by keeping your insulin low. Your cortisol greater than 600, yeah, I'm not quite sure how you can lower that because it's kind of a stress hormone. And it may well be that aspects of your life are particularly stressful. And you might need to address that. The person I think who's the most knowledgeable, and I'd advise you to check him out, is Dr. Fung. And he came to our conference here in 2015, and it's just his career just rocketed after that. He's written 3 of the very best books in the field. And you'll see that he talks about obesity and the role of cortisol in obesity. And you might want to check up on that. And he will probably explain the ways that you can reduce your overall stress and drop your cortisol. So you're quite right, because most of us think in terms of insulin as driving obesity. He said, no, it's not just insulin. There's also cortisol and some other hormones as well. So I would, Dr. Jason Fung, and he's very active on social media. He's got some wonderful videos, and he's also written these fabulous books. So I think that it would be most helpful for you to read his books and see what he talks about, the hormonal basis for obesity and the role of cortisol.
Thank you for that, Prof. And thank you so much, Gail, for that question. So we have come to the end of our live today, everyone. Prof, a big, big thank you to you for giving your time to us, for answering all these questions. A big thank you to all of our audience members, all of our supporters. I would like to remind you to please consider supporting us on our Patreon platform. That helps us to continue the work that we do and Prof. Tim Noakes' legacy. Then another reminder, the Nutrition Network's advisor training is currently 50% off for the whole month of July. So go and have a look at that. And then keep an eye out. We've got quite a few exciting Facebook Live scheduled for the month of August that's coming up. And then, of course, Prof, we will have you back here again at the end of August. So thank you again, Prof. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely, lovely day further.
Thanks, everyone. It was fantastic talking to you all over the world. And from little old Cape Town, my little office here, my room in my office in Cape Town, it's wonderful to know that the information is being used all around the world. So thank you very much, all of those who contributed from all around the world. We really appreciate that. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you and bye.